Hello, Professor Willis. Um, my name is Aneek Sarker. First off, I'd like to thank you for all your patience that you've had with me all semester long. I understand it's always a busy semester, and I know I didn't make it any easier, but I appreciate your patience. So the presentation that I chose to present about is from CK Prahalad, it, the emerging work of managers. Specifically, I look into the speed of reaction, something that he talks about in his presentation, kind of looking at Japanese business culture, transitioning into the cultural diversity and the need for it as businesses globalize in the future and currently. And then lastly, the impact of the internet. How that's basically completely changing how we do business on a day-to-day basis. So I work at Mitsubishi Electric Corporation. The short is called Melco. I'm in the automotive equipment group division. So basically, Melco makes anything from escalators to satellites to car parts. So I specifically work with Ford. My account is Ford, and Ford is a great customer to work with. They're very responsive and they give great feedback. And so a couple of years ago, we were proposed a business, a key piece of business where they requested us to use a specific technology within one of our components without giving away too much information. And this technology was already developed in the market. It was mature in the market, and we just had to use this technology as a sub-assembly or a component um, within our part itself. Of course, we fed this information back to Japan, but Japanese business culture in general is it is very bureaucratic almost, but it takes a very long time for them to make a decision on things that change the way that they would do business or change the way that they would manufacture something. So it's been 3 years now, and we're finally starting to implement this new piece of technology. But we're already realizing the costs of lost business opportunities. I'm saying 60 million here, and that's on annual. Um, that's an annual estimate. So it's even more over the life of that business. And so this kind of just shows Japanese business culture in general. It's just a little bit slower than most in reacting and pivoting to new technologies. And a lot of the key traits in Japanese business culture is lifetime employment. Whenever you get hired in, you're there, you're a lifer. Another thing is seniority. Usually the CEO is the oldest person in a room. And there are lots of key traits for Japanese business culture. Not all of them are detrimental, um, but some of them do hinder good business practices. A case study is the famous electronics industry, where Panasonic, Sony, Hitachi, these are all big players. 20 years ago, they seemed unstoppable, right? Cell phones, gaming consoles, TVs, all electronics. Japanese guys were known for their electronics. Um, but within a decade, a lot of these electronics industry within Japan faltered due to a lot of the way they started designing TVs, radios, and cell phones. The modularity of a chip, of a simple chip, completely changed the game. And now Sony's most profitable business divisions are banking and insurance. Um, so very different. Just a simple graph showing, within a decade, TVs, phones, PCs, which were the bread and butter for the electronic industries in Japan, completely tanked. So when we look at this, this pivoting and being able to pivot into the correct, you know, direction, a lot of times diversity is required. Diversity gives you that outside perspective. It gives you multiple perspectives as you march forward. And Prahalad talks about having this diversity. And if we just take a quick look into the North American executives at Toyota and the North American executives at Mitsubishi Motors, we see Toyota's executive team as being much more diverse than Mitsubishi Motors' executive team. Let alone if we look at the global picture also. The global executives at Toyota versus the global executives at Mitsubishi Motors, although they're still very heavy Japanese uh, executives, there is still more diversity within the Toyota management group. And you almost see it in the numbers. Toyota's coming in at 30 trillion Japanese yen in revenue versus Mitsubishi Motors coming in at 2.5 trillion Japanese yen. Obviously, these executive teams aren't directly correlated with the revenue numbers, but they do provide some insight, and they are something that you know these companies should look at. A couple of years ago, Ford came out with this strategy of one Ford. As we become global, uh, as globalization takes place, you know, Ford tried to streamline all these processes, all the engineering work, have the same management structures here in North America as they do in China or Australia and things of that nature. Um, you know, when we have these structures and organizations in different countries, it's not going to work all the time, and you can't let that hinder the way you communicate necessarily with your counterparts. Prahalad mentions yeah, different regions may have different approaches, but you can't let that be a gate. You have to keep trying to come to a common bond and try to work together to achieve your goals. So obviously, the streamlined process didn't exactly work out for Ford, and they did end up shaking up China's management, to become a little bit more, um, you know, uh, allowed for more Chinese influence into what they were doing in China. And of course, there are political reasons for this too, but the company has to be aware of those things. And I think as the years have gone by, they recognize that, and therefore, Ford China management did change to kind of help with their positioning in China. And managers have to create the common bond with their counterparts, and so obviously they do use the internet, and we're going to get into that. They use the internet a lot. It's an indispensable tool, to try and get to know your counterparts. A lot of what you do, sometimes you might look them up on LinkedIn or Facebook right away. But regardless, managers have to figure out a value system. As when you're talking with your counterpart in China or Japan, we have to understand what makes us tick. And so, as you work closely with these guys, you have to be able to influence them. So you kind of have to create your own value system, not only so that you can influence them, but so that they can also influence you. I mean, this is a collaborative effort globally. So Prahalad mentions this a lot. There has to be a common bond, and then there has to be some kind of value system that you get, and you have to influence without ownership, right? So you have to. Sorry about that. So you have to understand your audience in order to influence them, to create this value system. So the internet is changing everything, right? The internet changes, the way we communicate. Me doing this video, I'm able to do this over the internet. A lot of this class I did over the internet. businesses are changing the way they conduct, business because of the internet. WebEx allows us to go global. We're able to talk to someone in Japan, today. So these changes, a lot of times they might just be cost-effective changes or just to streamline a process. For example, when companies move from their own servers to a cloud storage system, you're saving costs in servers, not only, and you're also creating redundancy. So in a sense, your whole business strategy changes. But then you also have this social media aspect. Companies have to be uh, relevant on social media, in order to reach as many people as they can. Social media, there are billions of people in the world using social media. So you have to be relevant on social media in order to kind of reach all of your consumers that you want to reach. And of course, when you're on social media, you have to be aware of your presence. A lot of companies are aware of their internet presence, and you have to be aware of your demeanor. Um, so media marketing in general has changed. Social media marketing has changed a lot. Now there are whole departments dedicated to social media within marketing. The internet has changed so much. So the communication, um, the internet has changed how we communicate. Consumers definitely do have more power, as Prahalad mentions. They can go to Twitter and complain very easily about your company, but we, as a company, in turn, have to be active on the platform. We can go back and say, "I'm sorry for your experience. What can we do to make it better?" So, in that sense, not only do consumers have more power, but companies also have more data. So we can actually use that to our advantage, you know, and this is where the Internet of Things comes. The Internet of Things just makes up a lot of things, everything. But there's some value that we can use using the Internet of Things. We can get this data. We can aggregate or consume the data. We can analyze that data, and once we analyze it, we can create or sorry act or make projects around this data. We can create new things um, with this certain data, and then of course we can use the internet to communicate. This is just kind of a cyclical loop that we're for value added. What the Internet of Things helps us with. And lastly, we use the internet to communicate on a daily basis. Emails every day. Most of our life nowadays is emails, and of course, our parents, they grew up talking on the phone um, every however it was. I grew up with instant messaging, so close to text messaging, but text messaging really came out when I was in college. And today's kids are growing up completely on the internet. So the mode of communication is also changing. Emails were one phase, I think, going from phones to emails, but now we're going to have another phase, I believe, from where hot items will be done on text messages. Hot issues might be done on text messages, um, and you know, long issues that or projects can be done via email. And we also see as this younger generation grows up on the internet, there is a push towards a more casual environment uh, and more laid back environments and emails. Usually, a work text is thought of as a fire. So, in general, managers will need to understand how to communicate not only with elder generations, but also younger generations. Basically saying that an emoji will not hurt in an email. Emoji would be nice here and there in future texts or emails. So I do think there will be, you know, a new type of business texting um, platform in the future. And that's it. Thanks, Professor Gillis. Appreciate a lot of the work you put into the class. Your class is very insightful. You do get to learn a lot about yourself. Um, a lot of the books and assignments that you've assigned to us are actually awesome, and really appreciate everything. Thanks.